All right, now, everybody. Quiet, listen to me. We're going to start a show. Now, some of you people have been with me before. You know it's going to be a tough grind, but we're going to have a show.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon and good evening. Kim McAllister in for Mark Thompson on The Mark Thompson Show. Hey, Albert, welcome.
Good morning, Kim.
Good
it's just the
morning.
two of us today.
Yeah. This is a Wednesday show where we have a lot of great things coming up, including the great John Rothmann, former KGO talk show host, presidential historian, political analysis. He is waiting in the wings, so I'll probably bring him on a little bit early. Belinda Waymouth and Mark had a sit down about the environment. It's the Planet Stupid will happen today in the second hour. And so this is going to be a good show. Albert, I'm feeling good about things.
Yeah, and it's just a usual Wednesday. Mark will be back on Friday.
Absolutely. And I know you were telling me you're happy football season has started again.
I'm very happy. I look forward to Thursdays. Thursday starts with football, then Sunday, then Monday, then we do it all over again. So,
but the 49ers lost last time, right?
It's week 2. I'm glad I'm on the shows on Mondays because those are tough, especially after a while.
Those are very tough.
But I feel like they'll figure it out.
Did you hear about this case? I think it's in Solano County where, hold on, here it comes. This case in Solano County where this person has been paying their neighbor's PG&E bill, likely for the last 16 years. Yeah.
I haven't heard that.
You haven't heard about this? Okay. Let me tell you this. I wanted to start with something because so much is going on in the world with the fresh wave of attacks in the Middle East, which we'll talk to John Rothmann about. But wanted to start with this story because this person in Solano County saw something a little hinky with their PG&E bill. And so they tried everything to lower their power bill. And they even went so far as to buy a device to tell them how many watts their appliances were using. But the bill wouldn't go down. So finally, after taking all these steps to lower their power bill, the man calls PG&E, and it turns out instead of just paying for his apartment, he's also paying for the apartment next door.
My bad. I'm sorry.
He said, even after I turned off my breakers, I kept going outside to check my meter to see if it was still running, and it was still running. He said, I couldn't believe it. He was paying this whole time for the neighbors. 16 years he was paying for the neighbor's electricity bill. Crazy.
Yeah, I think I'm reading here since 2006.
Yes.
And, the fact that they were so meticulous into saying, like, wait, I'm cutting back. I'm not using that much electricity. And to find out that...
Can you imagine? So PG&E admits the mistake. They say, yes, we don't know exactly how this happened, but it did happen. They say they're going to make it right. I don't know how you make it right looking at the last, I guess maybe pay everybody's, pay both units for the last 16 years. That's crazy.
I think the bigger issue here, I think, is the neighbor. The neighbor has been living 16 years without paying. Like, wasn't there anything concerning? Like, I don't have an electric bill. This is great.
Hey, well, maybe the neighbor thought, well, this is pretty good. I'm not going to say anything. Let's just see how long we can get this to continue. And maybe the neighbor didn't realize that his next door neighbor was paying the bill.
I don't know. Maybe it would be funny to know how many people have lived next door. To see
in that time frame,
like, hey, guess what? Not only is the rent that costs this much, there's no electricity.
It's the lucky apartment, no power bill. That's crazy. Well, I wanted to start with that wackiness because we have a pretty serious story to talk about. And James sent me this video last night.
The Mark Thompson Show.
It's a video from MSNBC where Lawrence O'Donnell tackles the issue of abortion and talks about this young woman, 28-year-old woman, her name is Amber Nicole Thurman, who died because doctors in her state were too afraid to provide her with the care she needed. She had taken, I believe, an abortion pill, but had a rare complication and went into some type of sepsis, some toxic thing happened to her where she didn't expel everything and was having this horrible infection. And it was an easy fix that would have saved her life. And doctors were too scared to do it. She died, and she leaves behind a 6-year-old child. And I think sometimes women we'd like to think that men have no business having opinions about abortion because that's our bodies, that's our thing. And we know that the decision should come from us, but I think we forget that there are men who really do love women. They have mothers and sisters and daughters. And when you look at this video, and I wish I could play you the whole thing, it's really powerful. You realize there are, well, not that we didn't know before, but there are some really good men, some good guys in the world. Do we have the video, Albert? Let's roll it.
The choices made by George W. Bush and Donald Trump are now killing people. ProPublica is now reporting about the death of a 28-year-old woman in Georgia who died because of what George W. Bush and Donald Trump did to her when they appointed those Supreme Court justices. Amber Nicole Thurman was a healthy 28-year-old medical assistant who was the mother of a 6-year-old boy. And the choices made by George W. Bush and Donald Trump and the Republican Supreme Court justices and Republican politicians in Georgia, using the tools that those Supreme Court justices gave them, killed her. ProPublica reports, in her final hours, Amber Nicole Thurman suffered from a grave infection that her suburban Atlanta hospital was well equipped to treat. She'd taken abortion pills and encountered a rare complication. She had not expelled all of the fetal tissue from her body. She showed up at the Piedmont Henry Hospital in need of a routine procedure to clear it from her uterus called a dilation and curettage, or D&C. But just that summer, her state had made performing the procedure a felony, with few exceptions. George W. Bush, in his silent retirement in Texas, made that routine medical procedure a felony. Donald Trump is proud to noisily take credit for overturning Roe versus Wade and claiming that we all wanted that to happen, and he is pretending that he has no blood on his hands. Donald Trump is pretending that he had nothing to do with making a procedure, a routine medical procedure like a D&C, a felony. Amber Nicole Thurman would be alive tonight if the Supreme Court had not handed the 2000 presidential election to George W. Bush. Without George W. Bush's appointees to the Supreme Court, Amber Nicole Thurman would be alive tonight. She would be a healthy, happy mother of her young son, who was forced by George W. Bush and Donald Trump to attend his mother's funeral at age 6. When I was 6 years old, my mother had the same medical procedure that Amber Nicole Thurman desperately needed to live. My mother had given birth to 5 healthy children, but she kept going. She was trying to have a sister for her only daughter, trying for one more. And she suffered a miscarriage, and she routinely had a D&C at a local hospital in Boston years before abortion was legal, because D&C has absolutely nothing to do with abortion. None of the Catholic nuns teaching me at my elementary school then thought my mother should not have that procedure. Our beloved Monsignor Brandley knew that when mothers in St. Brendan's Parish had miscarriages, the doctors should give them whatever treatment they needed. Anti-abortion Catholic doctors performed that procedure routinely. There wasn't a single Irish Catholic politician in Boston, including the mayor and the district attorney, who ever tried to interfere with that medical procedure. Their sisters were having that procedure. Their daughters were having that procedure routinely in anti-abortion Boston because it has nothing to do with abortion. Nothing. If a politician interfered with that procedure and killed my mother when I was 6 years old, who's going to tell that boy? Who's going to tell that 6-year-old how his mother died and who is really responsible? The DNC procedure was routine in many areas of the country long before abortion was legal. Outlawing that procedure is sheer madness, criminal madness, murderous madness. Outlawing the DNC procedure is
and it's powerful, as you can see, emotional at times. And he blames the Supreme Court justices who overturned Roe v. Wade. He blames Donald Trump, and he blames George W. Bush. And I agree with John Slade, who says you're going to get more stories like this. It's devastating because the decisions like this, we knew they would hurt women, and we've heard stories where women's health has been put in jeopardy. But we're going to see more women die because doctors, nurses, medical practitioners in states where the laws have changed aren't able to provide care without fear of going to jail. And I'm sure it was torture for them as well. Heather writes, this was literally torture for her, for this young woman who leaves a 6-year-old son behind. I agree with teacher Lori when you look at who to blame. She writes, MAGA will blame her for taking the pills. They'll blame her for being irresponsible, for not taking steps to not get pregnant. It's horrifying. There is really only one choice for president. There's really only one choice. If this is an issue that matters to you, if women matter to you, there's only one choice. As a matter of fact, yesterday, Vice President Kamala Harris sat down with the National Association of Black Journalists and talked a little bit about abortion and got pretty passionate about the issue as well. I think we have that video too, Albert, right? No, he's making it work. Rain writes, I posted Amber Nicole Thurman's story on my Facebook page and no one responded or made a comment. It's almost too horrifying to talk about, honestly. It's almost too horrifying. I mean, what do you say? What do you say? I don't know. I mean, I'm so emotionally moved by this story. I think I might have problems commenting too. Let's check out what Kamala Harris had to say yesterday.
Over 20 states have passed what I call Trump abortion bans because I understand how we got here. The former president handpicked 3 members of the United States Supreme Court with the intention they would undo the protections of Roe v. Wade. They did as he intended, and in state after state, laws have been passed criminalizing healthcare providers. I don't know if anyone here has heard most recently the stories out of Georgia. Tragic story about a young woman who died because it appears the people who should have given her health care were afraid they'd be criminalized after the Dobbs decision came down. Laws that make no exception even for rape or incest, which means that you're telling a survivor of a crime of a violation to their body that they have no right to make a decision about what happens to their body next, which is immoral. An approach that doesn't take into account that most people, I think, agree you don't have to abandon your faith or deeply held beliefs to agree the government should not be telling her what to do with her body. If she chooses, she will talk with her pastor, her priest, her rabbi, her imam, but it should not be the government or Donald Trump telling her what to do about her own body and her life. So that's where I stand. We need to put back in place the protection of Roe v. Wade. and put that
And
into law.
and those restrictions that are also in.
We need to put back in place the protections of Roe v. Wade and let an individual, in consultation with her doctor, make the decision based on what she can determine, because she's smart enough to know what's in her best interest instead of having her government tell her what to do, especially a bunch of people in these state capitals who think they're in a better position to tell her what to do than she is to know what's in her best interest.
Yes. Yes. And so there is only one choice for president. There is only one choice. If you care about the health of women, and I don't care if you're a man or a woman, if you care about your mothers and your sisters and your daughters, if you just care about women in general, there really is only one choice. Only one choice. Let's bring in John Rothmann. He is a former KGO talk show host. He is a presidential historian. He is a political analyst. And he is my friend. John Rothmann joins the show. Welcome.
Kim, I want to thank you for highlighting that story. It is horrifying. And if ever there were a reason to elect, or rather, should I say, ever a reason to defeat Donald Trump, that's it. And Kamala Harris's eloquent exposition is spot on.
This is an interesting comment from OCB, who writes, Democrats had decades to codify Roe, and they chose to do nothing.
Incorrect. The Supreme Court of the United States made a ruling. The Supreme Court's rulings are not affirmed by Congress. They are the law of the land. Donald Trump said when he became president, as a candidate for president, that he would nominate justices of the court who would rescind Roe v. Wade, and too many people didn't believe he'd do it. Remember the principle of established law, the idea that it was the law. There was no need for congressional action, and that is another reason to defeat Donald Trump. This erosion of American justice is wrong. And may I say quickly, you and I have talked about the question of in vitro fertilization in the past. And you will recall that when the Dobbs decision came down, I suggested that IVF would be threatened.
Mm-hmm.
I hate to say that that is precisely what has happened. And the Republicans in the United States Senate yesterday refused to affirm a woman's right to in vitro fertilization. And House Republicans joined in. That is another reason why the Republican Party has deserted the very principles of the right of a woman to control her own body. And I'd remind you that every Republican president, through Gerald Ford, supported the Equal Rights Amendment, supported a woman's right to choose. And this dramatic turn in the Republican Party, which was affirmed by Ronald Reagan, I hate to say it, and George W. Bush. And I want to point out also that George W. Bush, when it came to stem cell research, is the one who put limits on that. And for those of us who have family members who have Parkinson's, or had Parkinson's, or other illnesses, it's a disgrace. So if you ask me, if you care about individual liberty, if you care about a woman's ability to control her own body, you cannot vote for Donald Trump.
That's interesting because Mars writes, it's unfair to say that if you won't vote for Kamala, you don't support women.
I didn't say that.
No. Mars says it. I'll back it up. I will say it absolutely. I will double down on it, Mars. I will say this, I believe this. You say it's unfair to say that if you won't vote for Kamala, you don't support women. And I disagree. I
disagree as well. I completely agree with you. Donald Trump has pledged to do certain things, and we have to believe him. And the president of the United States, whoever is president, has tremendous power. When Kamala Harris says that she will defend a woman's right to choose, I believe her. By the way, I want to make one other quick comment. I really believe this so strongly. Whenever I hear anybody say you should turn this over to the states, I'm reminded of the Southern Manifesto, issued in 1956, in which Southern senators and congressmen said this is not a decision to be made by the Supreme Court, the question of integration, Brown versus the Board of Education, turn it over to the states. It was as wrong then as it is now. If that had happened, we would still have segregation in this country.
Right.
There are certain issues which are national issues, and the fact that there is no regard for established law. What would you do if Donald Trump decided to overturn Brown versus the Board of Education? This is absurd.
Yeah.
And I think we need to address it directly.
I think it is absurd. And I would argue that it seems to me that if we have women that are struggling, we saw the woman in Texas who had to leave her state to get life-saving care. We saw this woman here, this 28-year-old woman who leaves behind a 6-year-old son who's now without a mother because some simple hospital procedure, some simple procedure that could have saved her life wasn't done because of what's happened. If you can see those cases and you know that more are coming, and you say to yourself, you're not going to vote for Kamala because, that's not your problem, then I think that you don't get it. You just don't get it. If you care about women, there's only one choice for president. Period. End of sentence. I'll go to my grave believing it, Mars. So absolutely not.
I agree with you, and I would ask Mars to reconsider the statement that she posted. I think it is incorrect as well.
I think when you look at that Lawrence O'Donnell video from MSNBC that we played a snippet from, it's a really powerful video, that statement that he made. And I feel like it took a lot of courage for him to tell his mother's story, his personal story, and to bring his own family history into that. And maybe that's what it takes, because I'm pretty sure almost everyone has a story.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And I hope those stories are remembered by Americans when we go to vote on November 5th.
Yeah. Speaking of fertility and women's issues and having babies, you alluded to this with the IVF. The Republicans cared about this so little that they didn't, Trump decided he's not going to instruct JD Vance to go back to the Senate and even vote on this. He went to a campaign rally. That's how little they care about this issue of providing access, making sure that women have access to reproductive care on the other side, even women who are trying to get pregnant. And they've said in the past that they support the right to have IVF or to have access to IVF. So why, during an election cycle where we know voters care about these issues, would they then slam the door on protecting IVF access a second time? Because this is the second time this has happened.
There is a division in the Republican Party. The Republican Party is now opposed to any chance for a woman to control her own body. What the Republican Party has done is a disgrace. It is why they should lose control of the Senate, why they should lose control of the House, and why Republicans should storm back and take their party. This is, look, it's sad. It's horrific. But that's not all the Republicans have done. Can you imagine, and I say this, there are the Republicans in the House, there we are. Can you imagine that a former president of the United States on the debate stage would suggest that Haitian immigrants are eating your pets, monkeys, cats, dogs, geese? Can you imagine that?
No, I cannot.
And we know it isn't true.
Yeah.
Mike DeWine, the governor of Ohio, who is a conservative Republican and a former attorney general of that state, has said it isn't true. The mayor of Springfield, Ohio, who is a Republican, says it isn't true. And yet, Donald Trump and JD Vance continue to advocate this absolutely ridiculous untruth. That alone should be enough to disqualify these two from holding national office. It is shocking to me. And I want to say one more thing. Senator Scott asked a question. Is there a plot to assassinate Donald Trump? Now, I wouldn't have believed this, except I heard it with my own ears. And Eric Trump, the president's son, they are trying to kill my father. I listened to this with absolute incredulity. The Republican Party needs to stand up and point out, Democrats aren't advocating the assassination of Donald Trump. They never have. There's not a Democrat who would say that. Now, there is a libertarian candidate for president of the United States by the name of Chase Oliver. He is the candidate of the Libertarian Party, who said anyone who murders Harris would be an American hero. No one has talked about that kind of disgraceful language. So
That's crazy.
Of course it is. Now, that's the whole point. The Republican Party has gone off the rails. And may I say that when Elon Musk, a great man, a brilliant man, but brilliance doesn't guarantee that you're right. I would remind you, Henry Ford, one of the most brilliant men in America who changed the face of America with his automobile, was an advocate that Jews were the international problem, the world's foremost problem, the international Jew. Didn't take away from his genius, but it certainly discredited him. And Donald Trump is talking about putting Elon Musk in charge of our American economy.
Yeah.
This is nonsense. This is lunacy. And by the way,
you're oh, go ahead. I have other things I want to talk to you about, but yes, go ahead.
I just want to throw this out. On September 11th, who was traveling on Donald Trump's plane? Laura Loomer.
Yeah.
A September 11th denier, a conspiracy theorist. And Donald Trump is still embracing her. What in the world is going on here? And may I say that when you have a former president of the United States publicly say, I hate Taylor Swift. That's what Donald Trump said.
Yeah.
Because she endorsed Kamala Harris. Can you imagine a president of the United States publicly declaring they hate someone?
No.
You know what that means? And by the way, he talks about mass deportation, including from Springfield, Ohio.
Yeah.
The people in Springfield, Ohio, who are Haitians are there legally. And may I say, Florida is now in play in this election because Florida has a large Haitian community. And do you think they are going to sit back and let this kind of nonsense prevail? So I'm pointing this out because these things are scary, just like the issue you raised at the top of this program. And every American, conservative, liberal, moderate, Democrat, Republican, male, female, should rise up and condemn this. The best thing that can happen to the Republican Party is to lose this election overwhelmingly. And I just want to say, Mitch McConnell made a comment yesterday about some of these moves, particularly on the question of IVF, saying it's ridiculous and shouldn't be pursued.
Well, let's go back to this issue of fertility.
Sure.
Because it has become, when you look at the abortion issue, you look at the IVF issue, and then you look at the whole childless cat lady thing. For some reason, it seems like fertility and what women have decided to do with their bodies, whether that means having kids or not having kids, is now a matter of discussion for Republicans.
Did you hear Governor Sanders?
Yesterday, Sarah
Huckabee
Huckabee Sanders has decided to take a poke at Kamala Harris
that she doesn't have children,
not
and
having
in the
kids.
Process insulted every step parent in America.
Let me lay out the story.
Step parents,
because yesterday they're at a town hall in Flint, Michigan, and Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who is sitting down with Donald Trump, takes a swipe at Kamala Harris for not having biological children. She's a stepmom. She's got 2 stepkids, but that's not good enough for Huckabee Sanders, who talks about that she was tearing up as her own daughter got ready for a dance. And her daughter said, "It's okay, Mommy. One day you can be pretty too." And Sanders said, "So my kids keep me humble." And unfortunately, Kamala Harris doesn't have anything to keep her humble. As if having children is the only thing in life that would keep you humble or keep you on track or make you some type of a person worthy of office. It's outrageous.
Sarah Huckabee Sanders is outrageous. But I want to point out to you, she has been consistently opposed to the right of a woman to choose. Something is definitely wrong in the Republican Party. And the Republicans have to cure their own malfeasance. That's all I can say. It cannot come only from those of us who were once Republicans and who are now Democrats. That's me. But it has to come from people who are currently Republicans. It has to come from the grassroots level. And can you imagine what Kamala Harris's stepchildren must be thinking about what Sarah Huckabee Sanders had to say? It's a disgrace.
It really is a disgrace, and it's no one's business whether you have children or whether you don't. It's, you know how you don't ask a woman whether she's pregnant? Because you don't know whether she's struggling, you don't know what's going on with that person. You just don't ask because it's not your business. Someone else's fertility or choices about children, not your business, ever. But since we're talking about it, let's talk about Kamala Harris, this woman who Sarah Huckabee Sanders says doesn't have any humility because she doesn't have biological children. Yesterday, Vice President Harris called for putting a cap on family child care expenses. She wants to hold costs to 7% of household income. Now, she said the state of affairs in our country is that working people often have to decide whether they're going to be able to work or to afford childcare. This is where she was talking to the National Association of Black Journalists. She said, my plan is that no working family should have to pay more than 7% of their income on childcare. It's too expensive, she said, for them to be able to work and to do that. This is a woman who allegedly doesn't care about families, doesn't care about children, doesn't have her own biological children, according to Sarah Huckabee Sanders, isn't humble because of it. And she's the one taking steps to help families struggling like this.
Yep, you're absolutely right. And that's all the more reason to vote for Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
There are compelling reasons to vote for her. And, I've been on the radio for many years and doing podcasts and interviews. I've always tried to be objective, clear, precise. Some of you who listen to me on KGO for many years know that I was criticized for not being critical enough of Donald Trump, for being too objective. Well, we are now at a turning point in the American saga in which the American people have to have a firm stand against this. And by the way, every time I hear the Republicans say we need to lower the rhetorical excesses, we need to lower everyone's blood pressure, let me tell you something. I believe in telling the truth. And the truth is that Donald Trump is a threat to America. And that needs to be made clear. Harry Truman once was called Give Him Hell Harry. And he was asked what he thought about that. And he said, I'm not giving them hell. I'm just telling the truth and they think it's hell. And that's what we have to do with Donald Trump in this campaign. For the next 48 days, we have to hold his feet to the fire. And we have to expose to good, honorable, decent Americans, conservatives, Trump supporters, what this is. I heard today, by the way, a very interesting report that a group of governors have gotten together to promulgate the approach that when Donald Trump tries to do election denial, if he loses the election,
right,
that the governors of the states have to stand firmly with the American election process. One of the gravest disservices that Donald Trump has done to America is the idea that our elections are not fair. Now, look, there is some question about the outcome of some elections, 1876, 1960. You can talk about that. But in the end, what do we Americans do? Even if we disagree with a result, we support it. Because what is America famous for? Orderly transitions of power.
right.
Who is the only president of the United States, and now candidate for president, who is trying to subvert the idea of an orderly transition of power? That is Donald Trump. And that is something else the American people need to repudiate. Look, I just read a book. I told you about this in the break, and I'm going to show it up so people can see it. It's called Unhumans. Got it? Got a clear picture?
Yeah.
And
wrote that?
the introduction to this book is by Steve Bannon. And the endorser of this book are JD Vance, Tucker Carlson, Donald Trump Jr., General Flynn. When you read this book, you understand they don't care about truth.
No.
Do you know that according to this book, which is endorsed by these people, Joseph R. McCarthy was correct in his anti-communist crusade?
Who wrote
That
the
the
book?
insurrectionists of January 6th are really national heroes? I read this book. Every American should read this book because it exposes the fact that these people are willing to lie. Unhumans. And it says the secret history of communist revolutionaries and how to crush them. By the way, when Donald Trump can accuse Kamala Harris, he calls her Comrade Harris. I've known Kamala for years. She's not a communist. She's never been a communist. It's absolutely ridiculous. But then when Donald Trump calls her a fascist, which he has done repeatedly, it can
over
easily
and
be
over
pulled up.
again.
You can hear it over and over again.
Yeah.
What nonsense. I know what a fascist is.
Well, what's interesting about that, John, is then status post the second apparent assassination attempt on Trump, where the person never fired a weapon but got pretty close to him on the golf course. The rhetoric is, oh well, it's the Democrats' fault. It's Kamala Harris's fault for
And Joe Biden.
And Joe Biden's fault for using violent words and calling them the Republicans fascists. And last night I'm watching tape after tape of Trump calling Kamala Harris fascist and, as all these other horrible things. So when you talk about if you're going to blame someone, then let's spread it equally around here. Because this,
can I just remind people?
I wouldn't even say equally around. I would say Trump has more violent speech, right?
I just want to remind people, when I was on KGO, there would be people who would call me and say, Donald Trump's a fascist. Every single person who listened to my broadcast knew that I said, no, he's not. I know what a fascist is. Benito Mussolini was a fascist. Adolf Hitler was a fascist. Francisco Franco in Spain was a fascist. We know what fascism is. These are not fascists. And the idea that Donald Trump, in the same breath, could call Kamala Harris Comrade Harris and also call her a fascist show the imprecision and the incorrectness of, well, that's Donald Trump.
You mentioned elections, this whole effort to have officials not certify elections and the bipartisan effort by these governors to have current governors sign on and say, no, we will certify elections. But there's a couple other election stories I wanted to run past you.
Can you just, one sec, emphasize that? Okay. We need to look at this because Donald Trump, I guarantee you, if he loses, will cry fraud.
Of course, he's already laid the groundwork for it.
He said the only way an election is legitimate is if he wins.
Is that the craziest thing? There, though, are people in Arizona who are now worried that they're not going to be able to vote. I don't know if you saw what's happening in Arizona, but they had this election system error where somehow information transmitted between the DMV, where people, when they register their vehicles, are automatically, I guess, registered to vote in Arizona, didn't translate to election law, didn't take into account election law when it sent people voting pamphlets and other things. So the Arizona Secretary of State, who's a Democrat, his name is Adrian Fontes, yesterday goes to the podium and says, we got a problem here. And here's what happened. I think we have the video, Albert. Let's see what he says.
Well, the 98,000 people, as I indicated earlier, all received their driver's license prior to October 1st, 1996. Now, that's the day where Arizona started requiring proof of legal presence in the United States to get a driver's license, right? So green card, legal permanent resident, student visas, or anyone that was born in the country. After October 1st, 1996, that was a requirement. Before that, there was no such requirement. Now, at some point, these individuals would have been issued a new driver's license. It's that new issuance date that the voter registration system saw as the issuance date. And because the state of the law after that was that these folks had already provided documented proof of citizenship, whether or not they had wasn't the case. Motor Vehicle Division was telling our databases, our electronic system that they had because of that new issuance date. This coding error, I would call it, has been fixed by the governor's office, and the receiving side over on the voter registration database has been fixed as well. But imagine, if you will, my case. I received my driver's license. It was originally issued in 1986. Had I stayed sort of in the same home and never really done anything but maybe get registered to vote in a new place later, after having received a duplicate driver's license, for example, maybe with a new address, I wouldn't necessarily have had to go down to the MVD, but that new issue date would have been after the documented proof of citizenship requirement popped in on the registration side. But as to the MVD, their business rules didn't change anything but the issuance date. So the voter registration system would have assumed that I had provided documented proof of citizenship. That's the miscommunication between these two systems, and that's why this is an issue right now. That's also one of the reasons why we are hoping that the Supreme Court in the legal case comes down on our side, because through no fault of their own and with no notice, these voters have been voting full ballots since the last time they registered.
Yeah, so 98,000 people affected by this. 98,000 people, and most of them, as is fitting the demographics of Arizona, are Republicans that could be affected by this, that think they're registered to vote, maybe have been voting and shouldn't have been voting because they didn't provide the proper citizenship documentation. This is a mess for Arizona. A little bit more from Secretary of State Adrian Fontes.
This happened because we've got policies that are being driven by conspiracy theories, and we have for a long time. It has never been the case in the United States of America or in Arizona that non-citizen voting has been anything other than vanishingly rare. And yet we have a very onerous system. And assumptions are being made by lawmakers that you can snap your fingers and solve these problems by comparing this database and that database. Obviously, that's not true. But it's even less true where you have systems that are not only outdated, but underfunded. 2 years ago, I asked for a budget that would have allowed us to do the full-blown survey that we might have been able to find this without any guarantees, but we asked for that money and we didn't get it. We asked for those technicians and we didn't get them. This year we asked and we got a little bit more money, but we simply didn't have the time before the election to do this. And again, this is a 20-year-old problem. This is a result of bad policy and underfunding of government systems, even tangential systems like the motor vehicle division that has a direct impact on our voting systems. Dennis?
Yeah. So thank you, Albert. I appreciate it. So there you go. He's talking about the fact that, you know, the laws in Arizona are meant to ensure that people that are not citizens don't vote, but he says that's vanishingly rare and doesn't happen. And because of that, now you have 98,000 Arizona voters, and whether or not they'll be able to vote in this election, there's a big question mark.
Yeah, look, this is a disgrace, and it is brought on by these conspiracy theorists. And I would remind you that the Republicans have recently tried to pass a bill about having to be an American citizen to vote. That implies that there are non-citizens voting who are influencing our elections. Now, there may be, on occasion, a non-citizen who votes, but no indication of a mass movement. What does Donald Trump say? Millions of people have come into this country, and the Democrats brought them here. Why? To corrupt our election system. Let me tell you something. This country better gear up, because on November the 6th, there will, if this election is not a decisively decided election, there will be a battle over who won and who lost. I want you to know I teach at the Fromm Institute at the University of San Francisco, and I was asked to come in and do a post-election analysis. They said, "Do you want to come in November 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, whenever the election's over?" I said, "You better make it the week after, because if Donald Trump can dispute this election, he will. And we will be talking about it right here on the Mark Thompson program."
Yesterday, Heather writes, I had to renew my license and reconfirm my voter registration. We talked about, yesterday being Constitution Day, and there was a push to make sure that everyone double checked their voter registration. So I hope everyone did that because, sometimes you don't know. So it's important to make sure. But speaking of elections in California, Governor Gavin Newsom yesterday signed this election deepfake ban and did so in response to Elon Musk. California is now the nation's most aggressive when it comes to laws that are in place based on AI generated content. And they're doing it right before the November election. And we've seen, like we saw with Taylor Swift, and you mentioned this earlier, Trump coming out to say, I hate Taylor Swift, because she legitimately did come out and support Kamala Harris for president. But before that, there was a deep fake post of her saying that she supported Trump. We're seeing this now with foreign election interference as well, where it's really difficult for people to tell what's true information and what's not.
AI is potentially a great asset. I can tell you I am very concerned about AI. My sons decided to have fun with me. So they punched into the computer Wendell Willkie and Richard Nixon in order to establish a relationship. Willkie died in 1944. Nixon wasn't elected to Congress till 1946. And what AI spun out was the most remarkable nonsense about the relationship between these two men. I can tell you now that my wife and I had to respond to some unfortunate news. We wrote a beautiful piece. My wife actually wrote it. And she put it through AI just to see if she could improve it. This is something we better think about. Kim, you have two children, one now in high school, hard to believe. When they have to write their papers, how are you going to know that they're not using AI? Because you can't look at everything every day.
Wow.
So for teachers in college or high school, the idea that students will be able to create artificially papers on leading subjects. In fact, they won't need authors of books. They'll just punch it in and it'll be spun out. Now,
what's interesting is for the first time in papers sent home and emails sent home from school this year, from the high school English teacher, I got a note saying that the use of AI is forbidden in her classroom, won't be tolerated, that students have to sign on to this contract saying that they're not going to be using AI to write papers. So teachers know that this is an issue and they're getting ahead of it. It's in the syllabus. This is a classroom rule. You
sure,
don't use
and
AI.
you know something?
Yeah.
I believe most kids, when they sign that pledge, will fulfill it.
Yeah.
But maybe, just maybe, there will be kids who won't. And the teachers have to be able to discriminate. I taught a course at USF for undergraduates, and somebody submitted a proposal to me. Well, I read the proposal and I said, I know exactly what this is. I know where it came from. It's not you, but you can't know everything in terms of what is, excuse me, plagiarized or artificially generated.
That's true.
So I'm only suggesting you're absolutely right. What Gavin Newsom is doing, and I haven't read the legislation. I don't know if I were governor whether I would have signed it, but I'm now going to look at it because, of course, I find out all the latest news from Kim McAllister.
Well, let's move forward because I don't have a lot more John Rothmann time, but
What?
I do want to, I know, and I want to talk about what's happening in the Middle East. But before we get there, I saw a story yesterday in Newsweek about Donald Trump's support from evangelical pastors is slipping. There's this new poll that was taken by Lifeway Research and apparently shows his support among Christian pastors has changed since 2020. Now, these are the people that are supposed to be his base, right? An overwhelming majority of evangelical pastors still say they're backing Trump. in November, but the survey reveals his support among this group has dropped compared to 4 years earlier. 61% of evangelical pastors who responded to this poll say they do plan to vote for Trump, compared to 68% in a poll conducted in September of 2020. They asked 1,003 Protestant pastors from August 8th to September 3rd. The poll found Trump with a 32% lead over then President then Biden was
President
running,
Obama.
right? He's
President
still
Biden,
president, right? Yeah. It was 53 to 21%. Okay, so Trump had a 32-point lead in this poll. The current poll shows the former president, Trump, with a 26-point lead over Kamala Harris. It's 50 to 24%. So the lead is slipping for him among the Christian folks. What do you make of that?
Well, let's point out that evangelical Christians who really are Christians must really think about a vote for Donald Trump. It's one thing to oppose a woman's right to choose because of your religious principles. I may not agree with it, but I respect it. But for someone who calls themselves a Christian to vote for Donald Trump, who is unconscionable on so many levels, including eating cats and dogs, even when he's wrong, I mean, there has to be a true test of Christian principle. And I hope that that poll is correct. Remember that 1/3 of the American people over the age of 18 identify themselves as born-again Christians. I'm using the term born-again rather than evangelical. And they must be held in their own minds to a standard that is higher because they call themselves Christians. And so I hope that what you are indicating as a result of that poll is true. And that is that even people who seem committed to Donald Trump will understand the total moral corruption of Donald Trump. And by the way, let me be clear on this. I don't want any harm to come to Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
I want him to be judged by history, and I believe the judgment will be harsh. And more than that, I want a judgment on Election Day, not on whether you agree with Donald Trump on a whole series of issues, but whether you would trust a man who lies congenitally, who has been convicted 34 times of felonies, a man who has been accused and convicted of sexual assault, whether you can elect a man who is an election denier, whether you can vote for a man who refused to defend his own vice president when the cry "Hang Mike Pence" came out. Can you vote for a person who tried to destroy the principle of one man, one vote, electoral democracy? So my feeling is that evangelical Christians, and by the way, that applies to Protestants, Jews, Catholics, one and all. How can we as a country put a man like that in the White House?
You mentioned the eating cats and dogs thing, and I saw two interesting points on that yesterday. One was a comment saying that Donald Trump has done more damage to Springfield, Ohio, than Haitian immigrants ever could have. Now
Correct.
you have state troopers coming in to try to protect a couple of local colleges there and schools that had to close down. There have been bomb threats. This is a mess.
At
What
hospitals too.
Yes. What they have done by trying to create a story, which was admitted by JD Vance, to highlight the plight of immigrants who are in Springfield, Ohio legally, I might add. So now we have a problem with people that are here illegally and legally, I guess, as long as you look
And Donald
different,
Trump
they have
said
a
his
problem with you.
deportations would begin with Springfield, Ohio.
Crazy. It's crazy. And I saw the story yesterday that the mayor of Springfield, Ohio, when Donald Trump said, I plan to go to Springfield, Ohio to see what the situation is like there on the ground, the mayor of Springfield, Ohio is now saying, you know what? It would be okay if you skipped that. It would be okay if you didn't come here because we don't have the resources to deal with a former president visiting right now. We don't want you to come. Don't. That should be pretty embarrassing when the mayor of Springfield, Ohio, doesn't want Trump to swing through town.
Who is a Republican.
Yes. I mean, wow. And this is what they have done to make a point. They've wreaked havoc on this small community.
And JD Vance, not only the Republican nominee for vice president, but also the senator from Ohio, and his role in all of this, it's just unconscionable. Maybe Ohio will become a swing state after all.
Let's move to what happened in the Middle East now. Yesterday, we saw this pager attack where these pagers blew up, killed 9 people, injured hundreds and hundreds more. Today, a second attack. Walkie-talkies exploded in Lebanon. A day after the pagers blew up, the walkie-talkies blew up. The death toll today climbs to 14 in the walkie-talkie explosions. Now, is what we understand according to CNN. 14 people dead, 450 injured in the walkie-talkie explosions in Lebanon. That according to the Lebanese health ministry. That's where the information comes from. This now is being Reuters today and other news outlets, CNN as well, says Israel is responsible for this. And the Israeli defense minister as much as admitted this. This doesn't seem like a bona fide attack from a country. It seems more like terrorism.
No, I disagree with you profoundly. Hezbollah is threatening to rain 150,000 missiles down on Israel. You want to see terrorism? Let me assure you, if those missiles fly and Israelis in Tel Aviv and in Haifa and in Sfat die, that will be terrorism. The world has sat back passively in the face of terrorism. And the Israelis are saying, and by the way, 100,000 Israelis have been forced to flee their homes in the north of the country. Now, Israel could have used different action. I believe this is a absolutely brilliant stroke. Whose pagers blew up? Whose walkie-talkies are blowing up? Hezbollah's. And they were using those devices for purposes of terror. It is a war. And let us be clear, it is a war for Israel of survival. Hamas, if they rained those 150,000, Hezbollah, if they raised that 150,000 missiles down on Israel, you would see mass casualties like you've never seen. No. I believe what the Israelis have done is a master stroke, and I think it is entirely legitimate. They are fighting an enemy that is determined to destroy them. Nasrallah will speak shortly, and he will say, I know what he'll say, the Zionist entity must be destroyed. So,
when you say that Israel has a right to defend herself against what happened in October, was struck and then responded, that seems to be, to me, a legitimate response. Mm-hmm. But when you have an attack like this in Lebanon, which, and I know they're terrorist organizations, and clearly Hezbollah is, no friend of Israel, to put it mildly. But it seems like planting bombs.
They didn't plant bombs. What they did was to take devices being used by terrorists and were able, in what I think was a masterstroke,
didn't
to
they
make
plant
sure
bombs
that
in these devices?
They would all blow up at the same time. May I ask you, isn't there a war going on? 100,000 people have vacated their homes in northern Israel. Why do you think that is? Because Hezbollah has been firing rockets into northern Israel. Hezbollah has been, frankly, provoking an attack which the Israelis have tried to avoid. When you have 100,000 people vacating their homes, when you have rockets and missiles landing in northern Israel and now threatening Tel Aviv and Haifa, when you have major population centers potentially under attack, the Israelis have done the right thing. And thank heaven they have the technology and the wisdom to do it. Hezbollah is a threat to the world, not just Israel. But the Israelis, in my judgment, have every right to respond. Can you imagine?
But that
Kim,
was that a response though? And I guess what I'm
course
saying is,
it is. 100,000. Of course it is.
I'm not disagreeing that Hezbollah is a threat to the world. What I'm saying is this type of tactic seems like a tactic we've seen terrorists use.
No, it's a legitimate tactic. 100,000 Israelis have been forced to flee their homes, and the government of Israel has used great restraint. One would say that in Israel there's a lot of opposition to the government for not responding. 100,000 people. And so what did Israel do? Who is carrying the devices that have exploded? Members of Hezbollah, not innocent civilians, members of Hezbollah. And what did Nasrallah do? He said, don't carry a cell phone, because if you carry a cell phone, they'll know how to identify you. So the Israelis did something a heck of a lot smarter. They said, okay, you want to use pagers? You want to use walkie-talkies? We'll still get you. There must be an understanding that Israel is fighting for its very existence. And if, and I'm saying this carefully because I will be back on this program, if Nasrallah unleashes 150,000 missiles or 70,000 missiles, just half of his supply, what then will we say? Should not Israel have struck even sooner? No. Imagine, Kim, if it were your community that had to vacate completely because of missiles coming in from an agency which was determined to destroy you. And the United States had used this tactic. Rather than bombing, not rather than wholesale bombing, but blowing up the devices being used to accomplish these acts. Wouldn't you be relieved? I sure would. So 3 cheers for the Israelis. By the way, it is a change in warfare. We now know that because of technology which can be used against someone, it can be reversed and used directly to prevent terror. So I have to tell you, I applaud the Israelis. I don't applaud the fact that this has happened, because what I'd rather have is a peaceful border with Lebanon. And may I point out, Lebanon is being destroyed as a country because of Hezbollah and because of Islamic Jihad and other agencies which operate out of Lebanon. This is not a war between Israel and Lebanon. It is a war between Israel and Hezbollah and the radical Islamists. The Israelis have no choice. And I must say, I think this move was absolutely brilliant.
Well,
nobody suspected. Oh, one more point, if I may. I know we're running out of time.
Yeah.
The Israelis notified the United States that something would happen. They didn't say what it would be, because the United States can now say, as Secretary of State Blinken has said in Cairo, that the United States knew nothing about it. But this is something that is so important. And I notice a comment that there are wounded children.
William says people standing next to the exploding phones have wounded, killed, including children. So it wasn't just members of Hezbollah.
It was members of Hezbollah.
But
it is members of Hezbollah
we've heard stories that other people standing nearby were affected.
That's right. And let me tell you something. Same thing happened in Gaza. The Israelis didn't go into wholesale murder somebody. You talk about genocide. You want genocide. The Israelis, with their weaponry, could have destroyed and leveled everyone in Gaza. They haven't. And I urge everyone to consider, if it were your home, if it were your family, if 100,000 people in your neighborhood had to be moved because of terrorism, if you knew Hezbollah was working with Iran, that they have 150,000 missiles with a capability of wreaking havoc, of course you'd respond, and any country would. The fact that the Israelis have done this is brilliant.
Annie says it's not terrorism. She says it is a war tactic. But Milos says something different. Israel occupying all of the lands in Gaza and the West Bank are actually what causes this.
No, quite the contrary. Israel withdrew from all of Gaza, withdrew all of its settlements, all of its settlers, and turned it over to the Palestinians. What did Hamas do? They overthrew the Palestinian Authority and proceeded to create a network of terror tunnels. Do you understand what that means? Do you know that their weaponry has come from Iran, which is a major sponsor of international terrorism? And as for the West Bank, let me explain something very carefully, very considered. If free elections were held on the West Bank, Hamas would win. Do you know how small the border is? Do you know that from the Mediterranean Sea to what would be a Palestinian state is 9 narrow miles. I know people who jog 9 miles every day. I am not one of them. I want to point that out. But what the Israelis are doing is to defend themselves. Why? Because Hamas is public. It says we are going to destroy the Zionist entity. Because Hezbollah is public. It says we're going to destroy the Zionist entity. Iran is public. They are going to destroy the Zionist entity. The Houthis say exactly the same thing. There is no doubt that Israel is in a war of survival.
Yeah.
And I would ask a simple question. Would we rather see Israel destroyed, Jews slaughtered? Would we rather see that? Most of us who understand the position of Israel, not just Jews, but Americans, understand that, sadly, the only nation in the world which is fighting to this day for its very survival is the state of Israel. And I'm determined to explain clearly what Israel did was not terrorism. It's a defensive action, and they've used great restraint. And yes, if you're Hezbollah and you keep your materials, including those pagers, in the house with your children, or when you take your children out, you run that risk. But who would have imagined that a pager could be turned into a vehicle for preventing terror?
A couple of different opinions on this. Randall says, 8-year-old children aren't a member of any terrorist organization or government group. But then Annie writes, good grief, in a war, innocents get killed and children get killed.
The Israelis did not target children. They have never targeted children. What does Hamas do? Hamas puts their material in Gaza in schools and in mosques. That's why children die. And I would point out to you, and it's very important, that the Israelis did not target children in Lebanon. Hezbollah takes children and uses them. But in this case, it was a real surprise that terrorists planning terrorist operations would never anticipate that their pagers could be used. And where do they carry their pagers? Where did you carry your pager? Where do you carry your phone? You carry it in your pocket. And so I would say this is not intentional, and the Israelis should be applauded for using the restraint they've used. But if Hezbollah fires rockets into Israel, if they fire rockets into Tel Aviv and into Haifa and into population centers, the Israelis have made clear they will respond with full military impact. And that, my friends, would cause a broader war in the Middle East.
Brian puts down an $18 super sticker. Thank you, Brian, for that. And says, I completely agree with John. It is Hamas and Hezbollah that have picked the cities with innocent people on both sides as the battlegrounds for their terrorism. And Brian writes, Israel must do what they can to stop this.
Yeah. And by the way, what is the goal of Hezbollah and Hamas? It is the destruction of Israel. Don't listen to me. Listen to them. If you were told that your enemy was coming to destroy you, what would you do? You defend yourself. And that's what the Israelis are doing. If the Israelis wanted to commit genocide, they'd all be dead because Israel has the capability to do it.
It seems to me, though, that this is an escalation, that this type of attack is an escalation. And now, according to CNN, Hezbollah is vowing retribution. They're pledging to retaliate against Israel. The Lebanese government is condemning the attack as a criminal Israeli aggression. And so now we've turned up the heat on everything here when the United States has been working to have a ceasefire in Gaza. And now on this other front, we've got things heating up.
I'm not surprised. You will recall that in an interview I did with you and Mark at the very beginning, I said you have to think the unthinkable. The people who want Israel destroyed are going to do everything they can to do it. And the Israelis are not going to roll over and play dead. Jews have learned a valuable lesson. The only way they survive, we survive, is if we stand up for ourselves. And the Israelis have implored the world, do something about Hamas. Do something about Hezbollah. Have you heard anyone stand up and defend? You know, that is the problem. In order to have a compromise, by the way, people talk about a deal with Hamas. It's not a peace deal. It would be exchange of hostages. Why are people still being held hostage by Hamas? And why isn't the world demanding Hamas release them? And has the world condemned what was done on October 7th? And has the world voiced any opposition to the fact that 100,000 Israelis have had to vacate their homes in northern Israel? This deafening silence. And I'm going to say it very clearly. The Israelis will not roll over and play dead. The Israelis will not permit their population to be subjected to this. It is a clear sense of self-defense. And what we have seen now is the Israelis using technology, which Hezbollah was using to hurt the Israelis, reversing it. They should be applauded for having the ingenuity and the ability to make it work. But I'll tell you what I would worry about. We talked about AI earlier, is the fact that technology is a two-edged sword. Yeah. And may I point out, the United States has used technology in our own defense. We participated in the attempt to destroy the Iranian nuclear program by not going after Iran with bombs, but with technology. And that's going to continue to happen. Remember when we talked about cyber warfare? What we are going to see in the next war is precisely this kind of thing. We are going to see technology used to fight wars. And it's not going to be pleasant because, well, I hate to say it, the imprecision of technology, the imprecision is clear, and it will become a major issue. I'm waiting, and maybe next week we'll know the answer, how Hezbollah will respond and how the Israelis will respond. But I also ask the question, how will the world respond? May I just, I'll stop because I know we're out of time, but I want you to understand, and I want to make this clear to everyone. The Jews of the world faced extermination in the 1940s, and the world said nothing. And part of the reason there is in Israel, part of the reason is because Jews said, never again will we allow ourselves to be destroyed. And let me assure you, read Hezbollah, read Hamas, read Islamic Jihad, read Iran. They want to destroy not just Israel, but Jews. And Israel is going to do everything it can to protect the Jewish people. And speaking as a Jew who has only lived in a world with an Israel, I am very grateful for the fact that there is an Israel. Do you remember, by the way, no nation would take Vietnamese boat people. Do you know why Menachem Begin, who was accused of being a terrorist, admitted Vietnamese boat people to Israel when he became prime minister? He said, because we remember when we were boat people. That's the lesson, I think.
Let me read a couple of things before our time together ends. No Contendo has a comment and a $5 super sticker. He says, Thomas Suarez has an excellent lecture on how Israel spins the narrative on anti-Semitism via alternative radio with David Balsami. He said, and I maybe didn't finish writing, hides behind anti-something. And then he also writes with another $5 super sticker, Daniel Levy and Gideon Levy are two Jewish who tear Netanyahu apart. Democracy now, writes No Contendo. Bibi is lucky that Noam Chomsky can't crush right now. I'm not exactly sure what that means, or if
I'll explain. Noam Chomsky is a Jew who is an anti-Zionist, who is opposed to Israel's right to exist. Look, it's a very simple matter. We have seen a peace treaty between Egypt and Israel, between Jordan and Israel. We have seen the Abraham Accords between Arab nations or Muslim nations and Israel. The Israelis are willing to live in peace. They are willing to do what it takes to make peace. The Israelis have given up land for peace. But every time they do, it is viewed as weakness. And what Israel is saying is, give us the right in your minds to exist, cease your warfare against us, and anything is possible. All you have to know is that Hamas and Hezbollah and the other radical Islamic groups don't talk about peace. They talk about the destruction of the Zionist entity. And Israel will not roll over and play dead ever again.
Let's switch topics off of this one because Wes also had a comment earlier, and thank you for the $5 super sticker, Wes. Back to the election. He writes, with the Supreme Court and even Democrats, if the Democrats win both houses and the presidency, couldn't the court step in and decide any law that the Democrats pass would be invalid? Because we know the Supreme Court leans toward the right now.
No, you have to have a reason to go before the Supreme Court. The question of Roe v. Wade came before the court because it was a court decision, and there was an appeal to it, and the Supreme Court revisited it. But generally, the Supreme Court upholds previous precedent. Now, not always. Remember that in the case of Brown versus the Board of Education, the Supreme Court overturned its own decision in Plessy versus Ferguson. So, but you have to have standing and you have to have a reason to come before the Supreme Court. And I want to say a word in defense of Chief Justice Roberts. He understands, he's a conservative, he has his views, but he understands that the American people have to trust the Supreme Court. And if you want to understand the difference, a liberal, Al Gore, had a Supreme Court decision against him, but he abided by it, not because he agreed with it, but because America is a nation governed by law. What we are seeing from Donald Trump is a complete contempt for American elections. Now, fortunately, we are still a democratic republic. There will be a vote in November. I am focusing now on the efforts by Donald Trump that inevitably will occur to overturn a free democratic election. God forbid that such a thing could happen. Even when you lose, if you know you've lost, you have to concede. But Donald Trump says, if I'm not elected, the election was corrupt. And that is not a way to begin a process of trusting American democracy. That alone should be a reason to defeat Donald Trump for the presidency. Of course, I have enumerated many other reasons to defeat him, which I am perfectly happy to do.
We'll end it with this comment, which I thought was interesting. I'll see if I can find it again. It's about what happened in the Middle East, that this attack, looking for the comment, that this attack was somehow, and I'm sorry, I can't find your comment, scrolling back up. Oh, here it is. Be aware. They're expanding the war into Lebanon right before the election to preserve Bibi's power by getting Trump elected, is what he has to say.
Okay. First of all, there will not be new elections in Israel until long after Lebanon is settled. Bibi has another 2 years to go on his term. There's no indication his coalition is going to collapse. So the elections have nothing to do with it. I will tell you that Bibi's popularity will go up because 100,000 people in northern Israel, if everything is done properly, will ultimately be able to return to their homes. And as for helping Donald Trump, that is not the reason. I want to remind you that this country, Democrats and Republicans, stand firmly behind Israel's right to exist. Israel is not a partisan issue in American politics. And in fact, you will recall, because you listened to me on KGO, that when Donald Trump was able to pull off the Abraham Accords, I cheered him. I said it was a great diplomatic achievement. Support for Israel in the United States of America is bipartisan. Democrats, Republicans, independents, because we believe even if a country does something wrong or you disagree with a country's policy, it doesn't obviate that country's right to exist. Believe me, if we were using that standard, the United States of America would have vanished from the map years ago. The trick for Israelis, a vital, vibrant democracy like America, is to try to ensure that they do the right thing. And let me tell you something. Sometimes nations don't do the right thing. Sometimes nations do the right thing. But in the end, the right of a nation to exist, Israel's right to exist, the right of the United States to exist, despite the grave injustices we have committed over the years, beginning with our native population, it doesn't obviate the fact that you try to correct what's done. But right now, and I say this emphatically, what Israel is doing is fighting for its very existence, and I support that fight for existence because I believe that in the end, good must triumph over evil. And nobody will convince me that the terrorism being used against Israel is good. So, Kim, thank you for allowing me to do this. And I know I'll be back next week, but I know I'll be back with you too, because
Yeah.
I'm always listening to Kim McAllister.
Thank you, John Rothman. Thank you for being here. I'm a little surprised at your reaction regarding the exploding pagers and the exploding walkie-talkies, because I feel like, and maybe I'm naive on this, but I look at a country like Israel and I'm holding it to standards that I look at for America, where we don't just go attacking other people, and we probably, I would think, wouldn't resort to blowing up pagers and walkie-talkies in some other country. It feels like the other side. It feels like terrorists throwing out bombs in the middle of a
With all due
crowded
respect,
marketplace. That's how it feels.
Yeah, I just want you to understand, if Israel intended to cause mass genocide, they would all be dead.
Yeah.
That when you are fighting a war for your survival, how interesting that you can turn technology being used against you to use against them. If they weren't carrying pagers and walkie-talkies to destroy Israel, Israel would not have had to do what it did. But that's what you call a defense in a war. And you have to do it to survive. By the way, if you were one of those 100,000 people who had to vacate their homes because of terror, you'd be thrilled.
Thank you, John Rothman. I appreciate you coming on the show.
Anytime.
And I appreciate all your extra time. I kept you for a full hour, so thank you so much.
May I say it's my pleasure. And
thank you.
May I remind, I'm glad you celebrated Constitution Day yesterday. I celebrated it. And if every American would look at the Constitution about America, we'd be in a lot better shape. Thanks, Kim.
John Rothman, everybody. Thanks, John, for being here. We'll see you next week.
With
Bye-bye.
pleasure.
Around the Political World with John Rothman is his podcast. You can catch it online. Just search for Around the Political World. You can also hear John, or read and hear John Rothman on The Voice of San Francisco as well. So other places to find John Rothman and his thoughts on world issues. Let's move into news, Albert. I think we've been remiss in not doing a newscast for the day. So we'll do that. We'll do a little stories from the sky, and then we'll talk to Belinda Waymouth, or Mark will talk to Belinda Waymouth for It's the Planet, Stupid.
Sounds good, Kim. I just put some news stories in there. Just want to let you know you've been
Okay.
talking to John this whole time. But yeah, just check the rundown, and yep, news coming up, and a couple more segments.
All right, sounds good. Here we go.
The Mark Thompson Show.
On the Mark Thompson Show, I'm Kim McAllister, and this report is sponsored by CoachellaValleyCoffee.com. Oh, the tea is good today. The Federal Reserve expected to cut interest rates for the first time in 4 years. The announcement expected to come at the end of its two-day policy meeting later today. The central bank widely expected to lower rates by at least 1/4 percentage point, up to 1/2 percentage point. This rate cut would be a sign the Fed likely believes inflation is continuing to cool. The Department of Justice is suing the companies that owned and operated the ship that crashed into a Baltimore bridge earlier this year. The DOJ filed the $100 million lawsuit against two Singapore corporations Wednesday. The ship in question, the Dolly, crashed into the Francis Scott Key Bridge in March, bringing it down. Attorney General Merrick Garland said the Justice Department is working to ensure the costs of clearing the channel and reopening the Port of Baltimore will be borne by the companies that caused this crash. The race for the White House is picking up pace as the candidates hit the campaign trail today. Former President Trump set to hold a rally in New York with heightened security measures after another apparent attempt on his life last weekend. Meanwhile, Vice President Harris will be delivering remarks at the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute's annual leadership conference in Washington, D.C. The House is set to vote today on Speaker Mike Johnson's spending bill that would help avoid a government shutdown. The proposal, though, likely won't have enough Republican votes to pass. Johnson's proposal would extend funding at current spending levels for the next 6 months, but it ties in voter ID laws, which caused over a dozen GOP members to withdraw their support. If a stopgap funding plan is not passed, the government will shut down on October 1st. So the clock is ticking, and definitely time is of the essence here. Sean Diddy Combs is set to appeal a decision to keep him jailed until his federal trial. The hip-hop and business mogul pleaded not guilty to sex trafficking and racketeering charges yesterday. Prosecutors have accused him of sexually abusing and exploiting women for over a decade. How this could have allegedly gone on for so long is wild. As mentioned earlier, California cracking down on election deepfakes. That's what it's called when the photos, videos, or audio look real, but actually were created using artificial intelligence. Governor Gavin Newsom signed a law yesterday that forces major online sites to immediately remove such videos that target voters. He says safeguarding the integrity of elections is essential to democracy. Social media platforms must also remove the deceptive material next year. A third bill signed requires political campaigns to reveal if they are running ads altered by AI too. Reaction pouring in on a plan to fix California's insurance crisis. New regulations aim to expand coverage in areas of high-risk wildfires. Insurance Commissioner Ricardo Lara testifying before an oversight committee yesterday, saying that this will bring companies back to the state and lower the cost to homeowners. The nonprofit group Consumer Watchdog thinks the opposite will actually happen, claiming the rules fall short and contain too many loopholes. Officials expect to finalize all regulations by December in order for them to start next year. San Francisco trying once again to stop Oakland from using its new airport name. The city attorney asked a judge yesterday to block this change as part of a trademark infringement lawsuit. He predicted months ago it would cause confusion, and now he says it has, with people mistakenly booking flights to SFO. He says a recent mediation over the name, San Francisco Bay Oakland International Airport, wasn't productive. Oakland officials claim the lawsuit is an attempt to stifle competition and travel choices by Bay Area residents. Dreamforce holding a San Francisco-based concert tonight with Pink and Imagine Dragons. It is day 2 of the largest artificial intelligence conference in San Francisco. About 45,000 visitors are attending tech events through tomorrow. That includes several celebrities set to speak like Matthew McConaughey, Kerry Washington. Tonight's charity concert will see Pink and Imagine Dragons take the stage at Oracle Park. The Dreamforce convention is expected to bring in $93 million to the city of San Francisco. And speaking of AI, San Jose State University is making history. It launched a brand new college this fall semester, which is the first of its kind in the CSU system. Students are learning about the future of AI and tech at the College of Information, Data, and Society. Administrators say this will prepare for the jobs of tomorrow. The college also teaches classes on cybersecurity, on data science, and offers courses for other majors as well. So this is what's going on in San Jose at San Jose State. At 23andMe, the entire board of directors has resigned. All of them.
What?
Effective immediately. Yeah, what is right? The mass departure yesterday took CEO Anne Wojcicki by surprise, and she says she's disappointed. The genetic family tree company has been struggling, the board trying to find a path forward. But again, now all of the members of the board of directors at 23andMe have resigned effective immediately. So there
I mean,
you have
you
it.
only have one shot to check your genetics, right, Kim? And then once you do that, you're done.
It's over.
And then also the news of the government using that to like find criminals kind of gets you worried as well. So I just don't know.
Yeah.
Did you ever do yours, Kim?
I haven't. Not that I'm worried someone's going to catch me in a crime, but I just don't like the idea of my DNA information being so accessible to the world. I don't know. Maybe that's weird. Did you do it?
No, I've always been curious and never pulled the trigger. I felt like there was that one year they're really trying to get everyone to buy it for around holiday time.
Yeah.
And if I didn't do it then, I probably would never do it. And I was right. And I never got to do it.
I've known people who've done it. And what's interesting is you can have siblings from the same parents and their genetic information can come back so differently. You know, what you get from each parent really varies between siblings. And I would have thought it would have been more the same. So the nation is celebrating a C-section for a porcupine. for the very first time. The San Diego Zoo, yeah, take a bow, San Diego Zoo. The San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance says the C-section saved the lives of the mama and the baby porcupine. Veterinarians say it marks a major advancement in veterinary science and a huge step forward in conservation efforts. So there you go. There is, speaking of creatures, a rat summit kicking off in New York City. New York City Mayor Eric Adams kicking off the first ever National Urban Rat Summit today. The focus, to learn how to control and manage the rat population, which has been a big problem in New York over the years. There will be presentations from researchers and experts in cities throughout the United States and Canada. Adams says the two-day summit will zero in on a framework for urban rat mitigation challenges, including parks, sewers, public housing, and trash containerization. So they're cracking down on the rats in New York City. They've got a whole summit on.
Is that containerization a ding word? Is that even a real word? I've never.
I didn't make it up. It is a word that has been written in this story, and I'm assuming it's coming from New York City Mayor Eric Adams. I've never heard it before, and I don't know if it's a real word.
It's never been anything like this.
Never in the world. This report is sponsored by CoachellaValleyCoffee.com. My coffee partner is not here, so I will focus on the tea. The teas they have, the loose leaf teas they have at Coachella Valley Coffee are the best I have ever tasted. And they have something for everyone, whether it's the mango tea or the Earl Grey. My favorite, the vanilla tea. They have a Moroccan mint, which is amazing. And it sounds weird, but it's so refreshing and so good. CoachellaValleyCoffee.com. They'll sell you tea bags there, which are organic and don't have plastic on them. So check that out as well. CoachellaValleyCoffee.com. If you go to the website and you kick around on there and you're looking at the coffees, which Marcus said are the best coffees he's ever had in his life, and I can verify the teas are the same way, and you do find something that you're interested in, make sure that you put in the savings code at the checkout, which is MARK-T, all together, MARK-T. It'll get you 10% off your total, and every little bit helps. So that's our gift and Coachella Valley Coffee's gift to you. Again, CoachellaValleyCoffee.com. I'm Kim McAllister, and this is The Mark Thompson Show.
The Mark Thompson Show.
Smash it with your iron rod. Use Mark Thompson.
Hey, which one of you is Mark Thompson?
What he's got going here is a situation.
It's unbelievably offensive.
Put up your pants, my man. Pull up those pants.
Ralph Nader just sent me a book. Did he send you one too?
I offer this sincere apology to you today.
Everything is going extremely well.
Call me a liar. Is that what you call him?
You, sir, are a liar.
You are a cover-up artist, and you are a liar.
Liar, your pants are on fire!
Google told me.
Can you let him finish, sir? It was wrong, it was stupid, and I'm trying to be a better person.
No.
I'm going to tell you what I think.
What are the porn stars doing?
Do you have a secret now?
It's an itty-bitty bit of weed?
100% effective, how about that?
Say what?
And this is their new home.
There is no defense for my conduct.
I misspoke. I stand corrected.
And I wanted to apologize to the Asian community, the Asian American community.
Time's up, mother effers.
It is the Mark Thompson Show. Thank you for being here. We had John Rothmann on the show. We will have Belinda Waymouth on the show as well. That is coming right up. And we also, maybe, if there's a little time, we'll get to a Stories from the Sky. Fingers crossed. But let's roll into this. We're talking about climate change, talking about some really important issues. Mark had a sit down with our eco-journalist Belinda Waymouth with It's the Planet, Stupid?
Some call me nature.
I am very passionate about the planet Earth.
A living, breathing planet capable of sustaining whatever life forms we see fit to deposit on it.
Spock, judging by the pollution content of the atmosphere, I believe we have arrived.
It's the planet stupid. No. It's the planet stupid.
Our guide for It's the Planet Stupid is Belinda Waymouth. Welcome, Belinda. Belinda, you look lovely. And that's half the battle in this game. But the other half, you bring information, important information about this great planet. Damaged as it is in some ways and perhaps many ways by us human beings. What do you have for us today?
Okay, well, let's do the good news for fires, because I think this is super important and kind of amazing. Because we're in a little bit of a race against time with forest fires. You know, the planet is getting drier, it's getting hotter. And what's been happening is for the U.S. Forestry Service, they have really just been in the game of putting out the fires, you know, and it's really intense work. You know, it's dirty, it's hard, it's hot. And also forestry work, you know, is kind of similar, you know, the logging that goes on. So as luck would have it, a lot of California's entrepreneurs, tech entrepreneurs, are now living sort of at the interface. You know, they're living in Mendocino County. They're living in fireland. And so because they're seeing it up close and personal, because they're, you know, really dealing with it. You know, there's one story of an entrepreneur, you know, who was rushing around with air purifiers for his 6-year-old kid. They are like, okay, we've got, you know, this innovative know-how. And there are also tons of investors who are very climate conscious. And so there's a lot of money. You know, they say, you know, the kitty right now is around $200 million. Let's fight fire with, you know, basically technology fire. And so they're coming at it, you know, with AI, with drones, satellites. They're turning, there are these things called skidders. So they're built by Caterpillar. They're a 10-foot high vehicle. They've got the massive wheels. They've got like a bulldozer blade at the front. And then they have this, a tree-sized grapple at the back. And what skidders do during forestry time is they're getting the felled trees, they're moving them to the area where they'll be delimbed and then picked up and transported to the sawmills. And then in non-felling times, the skidders are being used to basically, because our forests are full right now of fuel. You know, you've got the debris that's left behind after forestry. So you've got all the limbs, you've got all the brush and all the things that we need to deal with prescribed fires. And what these tech guys are doing, so it's this company called Kodama, I think I'm saying it right, Kodama Systems. They're like, okay, let's take a skidder and let's turn it into a robot. So they're arming it with cameras and with radar. They're hooking it up to the internet. And they are piling up these enormous piles of this debris. And biofuels had been being used as a source of energy, but that's a big no-no because that's just more carbon in the atmosphere. Why would you burn a tree made of carbon and, you know, put all that carbon dioxide up? And then in California, the rules for making pulp for paper, the environmental rules are pretty stringent. And so they were like, okay, well, we can't turn this, you know, debris into paper. We could burn it. I mean, sorry, not burn it. We could bury it. We could bury it underground and it would be this incredible carbon sink. And so that's what they're doing. And what's kind of great about this is the U.S. Forestry Service back in 2022 said, okay, we have to protect and deal with at least 50 million acres of forest, both on private and public land, in the next decade. We have to make them fireproof. We have to go in, we have to prune, we have to do prescribed fires. But it's a huge, huge job. And I don't think they could do it without the tech industry's help, without guys like, Kodama Systems coming in and saying, hey, we'll turn your skidders into these remote controlled machines that basically an operator miles away can operate 2 of them at the same time. And then it's not like a person. So a person operating one of them, it's a 12-hour, back-breaking shift, getting all this debris out and putting it in piles. Now a guy or a woman can sit in their home and on the computer, run these 2, enormous machines. And then they don't just have one shift, they work all night as well. So I just think, when you marry those 2 things together, the US Forest Service and these entrepreneurs who really care and can see the problem, firsthand, it's literally in their backyards. We're coming up with these amazing solutions.
I like the technology helping us through this because we seem to be looking increasingly to technology to find a way out of our predicament. I'm just talking about our general, human predicament here on Earth as stuff begins to unravel. And the specific predicament then is enormously helped by technology. It's really quite innovative.
Yeah. I mean, there's another story about a guy who, when he was at Boston University, he had this, it was like a PayPal thing. It was called WePay. He sold it to JP Morgan as a student for $350 million. And then he ended up using some of that money to buy a home in Mendocino. And then, firsthand was like, wow, these fires are intense. And he's got this collective called Convective, and they're doing all these different things. So they've got satellites up there, it's called Pano, and it's able to spot the fires. They've got helicopters that, come in. That company's called Rain, and they come in and they're, putting out the fires. And they're really coming at it from all these different points of view, because it's the fighting of it, and it's also the prevention, because, as we know, Native Americans have always talked about, you have to have these prescribed fires. You have to have the burn off, because otherwise you have all the fuel just left on the forest floor. And that, we've seen it. I mean, it just creates these infernos.
This forest management that you talk about, and was certainly spoken of by Native peoples, it's so important. And yet it's become more difficult also for the reason that you also more or less allude to, which is the urban wildland interface that becomes this place where easily these prescribed fires, if they get out of control, they could, end up taking over those areas that they're not supposed to take over. I mean, I guess I'd ask, I mean, we've had to get better at the prescribed fires, given the kind of development that we've done alongside these fire-prone areas.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things they're talking about doing is having cameras in space that will see, like, when a really big inferno is starting. And this is kind of pie in the sky. This is, like a futuristic movie to me at this point. But having these cameras that are on the ground, having satellites in space to see a fire when it first starts, and then having machines on the ground that could turn that fire basically in the direction of where a prescribed fire wants to go. So not just burning, towards, someone's, beautiful house in the Mendocino forest, but actually, turning it around and making it a prescribed fire. So this is where, these guys are, what they're thinking, like, how can we really, take this up to the next level? There was one entrepreneur, I thought this was kind of great. His idea was, how could you use, was it sonar? What was it? I put it down somewhere. It was, so there was this one innovator, tech entrepreneur, thought he could use sound waves to fight fire. He didn't get any traction with that idea. Everyone was like, I don't see how you can use sound waves. Well, he's the one who now has this thing called the Burn Bot. And this is kind of very different to sound waves, but it's an upside down, think of a propane barbecue. So it's like an upside down barbecue. It's the width that you need for a fire break. It gets dragged by a vehicle, and it shoots down heat and flames at 500 degrees and burns everything underneath it. So it creates, a fire break, and then it has this damping and stamping down of the ground. So it's completely wet afterwards. It's not going to cause a fire. But you drag one of those along beside a highway and you create a fire break. So you're protecting people who are escaping from a fire, but you're also stopping any sparks from the ignition of cars being able to get into the grass on either side of the freeway and cause a fire. So these fire breaks are super important, and they've been working all around Stanford University. They started out with one the size of a shoebox, and then they're in the hills, Palo Alto behind Stanford, working out, with the prototypes. And then the next thing is, you can see it's a clear fire break, and those things really save lives. So
that's brilliant. That is so brilliant. Yeah, that's really, again, the technology applied to a contemporary problem. So those are pieces of good news and progress being made.
Yes, absolutely.
Are you leaving us with good news, or do you have bad news?
Well,
also?
There is some bad news. Do you want it on top of that good stuff? Because the fire thing, it's kind of I think it's important for people to know about. And so, let's talk about it. So what's happened is, we talked about PFAS before on the show, the forever chemicals, the per and polyfluoroalkyls, they're just awful. And so, they're in our stain resistant carpet. They're in firefighters, they stop firefighters, protective gear, they make it, so it's, inflammable. They're in our non-stick fry pans. They're inside a popcorn, microwave bag. So don't be using microwave popcorn, people, because that's got PFAS in it. But the really awful thing, and it started out as a good thing. So in 1972, Richard Nixon, Clean Water Act, and part of the Clean Water Act was like, okay, industry, you can't put your contaminated water just into rivers and streams. It has to go to the waste management facility closest to you. So it did. But what's in that waste water that comes from industry? Some pretty terrible stuff. And then the other thing that the EPA started really encouraging farmers to do was to use the sludge from wastewater treatment plants. They call it biosolids as fertilizer. Well, we've done it all over the US. I mean, it's been done in a lot of places.
It seemed like a sound strategy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You were saving energy. You weren't, using fossil fuels to make more fertilizers. You were using this natural fertilizer. It's super rich in nitrogen and phosphorus and all the stuff that that crops need. But they really should have thought, do we want industrial waste going into that as well? Because basically it's sort of every terrible thing that we've ever done, we've now been putting in our land. And what happened was, a couple of months ago, the EPA is saying, okay, no more PFAS in drinking water. You have to get it out. And it's only safe at, 4 parts per trillion or less, 4 per trillion. And what they've found is that on this farmland where, say, a farmer hasn't actually used the biosolids on his farm, but a neighboring farm has, the groundwater can now have PFAS at the rate of 1,300 parts per trillion. And so that water is then being drunk by livestock. So this is cows, it's getting into milk, it's getting into the cattle. I mean, there are farmers in Texas who will not sell their cattle because they don't want this to be, on the market and people ingesting it. But the problem is, it's been going on for, a long time and been encouraged. And Synagro, the company that distributes it, they're part of the Goldman Sachs group, if you can believe. It's an asset company, one of their companies. And they're saying, well, it's not our fault. We just got this, biosolid. We were completely innocent. We didn't, know to check for PFAS. And they were checking for other chemicals, but not PFAS. And now it's, it's really in our faces. This is, in the biosludge, and it's on, a fifth of American agricultural, land. It's big.
I mean, I don't know how you reverse this. I mean, you can stop it, but it's probably difficult to stop it quickly, isn't it? Given the momentum behind the entire,
Yeah, this is the thing, and what was happening was it's they didn't want sludge going into the landfill, and we've used it to fill up old mines. I mean, we've put it everywhere, because obviously there's lots of it, but it really is the I mean it's sort of awful because they thought they were doing something good and using something that like I said had all these incredible nutrients in it that the soil needed.
It was almost a move towards sustainability.
Yeah, but to think that an industrial waste should be added into that, I mean that's the part that really sort of made my head spin. It's like, really, you're going to put what could be an industrial waste that would be really great for cattle in our crops? I'm not sure, but I think the thing now is it's always once you have the awareness then the change can come, and obviously it would be nice if it could come really quickly, and the EPA knows about PFAS because they've already regulated against them in drinking water. So yeah.
I just hope that there can be the right pressure brought to bear to correct this. As you say, it would seem to make so much sense for so long, although the industrial part might be a stretch.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is why I keep saying to our listeners, be really mindful about who you vote for, this election cycle, because the planet is, really needs all the politicians who believe the science as possible, sitting in the House to, make the right legislation for us.
I thought of you because the Associated Press story about the world creating 57 million tons of plastic pollution every year and spreading it from the deepest oceans to the highest mountaintops to the inside of people's bodies, which might be, the thing that people care about the most.
Yeah.
This new study said that more than 2/3 of that plastic comes from the global south. It's enough pollution, they say here, each year, about 52 million metric tons, to fill New York City's Central Park with plastic waste as high as the Empire State Building. This study comes out of the United Kingdom. They examine plastic that goes into the open environment, not plastic that goes into landfills or is properly burned. And Nigeria emitted the most plastic pollution of any city. Lagos, Nigeria, the most. And they really break it down. And sadly, it's some of these emerging economies. New Delhi is among the biggest emitter. Luanda, Angola, Karachi, Pakistan. This Al-Qahira in Egypt. And India leads the world in generating plastic pollution, 10.2 million tons a year, they say. So,
here's the thing about the developing, about the South, and what's so awful is so that, we've gotten much more stringent and really aware of it. And we're trying to hold, producers more responsible for it, the extended producer responsibility, EPR thing I've talked about on the show before. But the awful, awful thing is with all the fracking, we created all this, ethane and methane, which is the feedstock, which is used to make plastics. And what happened was cracker facilities, which is where they make the plastic, turn the ethane and methane into plastic. They've, been putting those, they've been building them all over the world. But what they do in developing countries is they sell them tiny little, one-serving sachets of conditioner, shampoo, liquid detergent, all kinds of things. That they saw this as, the plastics industry saw this as an incredible, growth opportunity. And when you go, I mean, I've showed before on the show pictures, from Indonesia where you're in a market and you'll be in a stall and it's just thousands of these little sachets. Now, the thing about them is they have foil in them, they have plastic, they're 3-layered, they're impossible to recycle. But we shouldn't be sending things like that to those countries that do not have a robust waste management system like we do. We have collection at our gate. Someone comes, they take that rubbish. These people don't. They throw it into the backyard. It goes into the streams. That's how it ends up in, bigger waterways and in the ocean. And it's really responsible, I would say, of the global, the North, the developed North. Like, stop doing that.
That's very interesting that you follow the breadcrumbs back to the global North. The United States, by the way, ranks 90th in plastic pollution with more than 52,500 tons. And the United Kingdom, 135th, nearly 5,100 tons. It's a smaller place, too.
Yeah, it's way smaller population than the U.S.
But this is really a great point you made. And I have to say, I'm embarrassed to say I never would have thought of it, that don't finger wag the global South.
No.
No.
I think it's, and also the other thing is there are so many of those countries, that we sent our recycling to. We thought we were all recycling and being so good. And then when China, I can't remember how many years ago it is now, said, no more foreign garbage. We had nowhere, we were sending it by the tanker load to China. And we turned, parts of rural China that were beautiful got turned into dystopian cesspits because they were dealing with all this plastic that they ended up having to incinerate. And then when China said no, then we started pushing the Philippines and Indonesia and Malaysia and these other countries, in the East to take our recycling. And the fact is, you shouldn't use more plastic, in your country than you can recycle in your country, because it's your responsibility. That you shouldn't be, offshoring any of that responsibility to another country, especially somewhere that doesn't have, a robust waste management system. And they said that when China said no more foreign garbage, like warehouses were just filling up all over the US with plastic trash because we didn't know where to send it.
Right. We didn't really have the plan to live sustainably. Our plan was to ship our unsustainable lifestyle across the ocean. I love that we visited, and I know you're traveling. I hope that there'll be a chance for you to beam in from wherever you are, but if not, we'll see you when you get home. Love your contributions, and I love that we talk about probably the most important stuff, which is the future of this planet. Belinda Waymouth, thanks. Travel safely.
Thank you so much. I will see you.
Bye-bye.
More.
Is the planet stupid? No. It's the planet stupid.
Next time, only on The Mark Thompson Show.
The Mark Thompson Show.
Who's Mark Thompson?
Hey, which one of you is Mark Thompson?
Before we end the Mark Thompson Show for the day, I will let you know that there's been a jumbo-sized rate cut. The Fed slashed rates by a 0.5 percentage point today. It is the first rate. Yes, I know. It's bigger than expected, and it's the first rate reduction since COVID. Fed Chair Jerome Powell says it's not mission accomplished yet. He said we're not really at 2% as far as the nation's inflation rate, but the Fed is encouraged by the progress they have made. And there's been some criticism that this has happened as we are close to an election. And on that, Powell said he's been through 4 presidential elections, and he said it's always the same. He said we're going into this meeting in particular asking what's the right thing to do for the people that we serve. He said it's never about anything else. He said that politics is never discussed at Fed meetings, and he said it actually takes time for the effects of Fed rate actions to spread through the economy, so that a rate cut in September may not actually make much of a difference to the United States economy by the November 5th election. And here's the quote from Powell. He said, "Our job is to support the economy on behalf of the American people. We don't put up any other filters." He said, "I think if you start doing that, I don't know where you stop. So we just don't do that." So Powell says this has nothing to do with an upcoming election, but the Federal Reserve slashes the rates by a 0.5 percentage point. So that's a pretty big thing. Another breaking news story to let you know about is there was I'll say it's long awaited, or at least awaited, decision for who the Teamsters Union was going to support in this presidential election. And they have decided no one. They are not making a recommendation or an endorsement for candidate for president. The International Brotherhood of Teamsters, the last, possibly the most influential labor union to take a position on a candidate, they say their internal polling from the Teamsters showed a majority of their members are Trump supporters and not Harris supporters. It's the first time in nearly 3 decades that the Teamsters have not endorsed a candidate for president. So there you go. And I know they had said they wouldn't endorse anyone until they met with everyone. Now they're saying they're not endorsing anyone at all. Yikes. Another story to let you know about, there's a YouTube star. His name is Mr. Beast. This guy has more than 245 million subscribers. He's now being named in a class action lawsuit along with his production company and Amazon because 5 contestants from his upcoming Beast Games filed a lawsuit this week in Los Angeles Superior Court alleging that they were subject to chronic mistreatment, including unsafe conditions, sexual harassment is what they're saying. Mr. Beast, whose real name is Jimmy Donaldson, he is one of the most popular creators here on YouTube, more than 245 million subscribers to his channel. So we'll see how this lawsuit goes for him. I know there's a lot of things going on with sports as well, but I do want to let you know that Alaska Airlines has officially acquired Hawaiian Airlines. They call it an historic $1 billion deal. The 2 airlines will continue to operate separately as their own brands, but it means Alaska will keep its current routes. The merger creates a network of more than 140 destinations with Seattle and Honolulu as the largest hubs there. All right. We've come to 1 o'clock. Albert, anything we need to do?
No, I think we made it to the end. It was a good show. That's huge airlines. We'll have more airline stories tomorrow. I have
stories from the sky tomorrow.
Really big stories from the sky tomorrow.
Wes with the $5 super sticker. I think we read the comment earlier. Thank you for that. Spencer, who was the first super sticker, and I did not mention it. I have been remiss. Thank you for the $3 super sticker, Spencer. And No Contendo with another $2 super sticker as well. And I know we read your comments to John Rothmann earlier. Huge thank you for that. And thanks to everyone who's contributed to this show. TheMarkThompsonShow.com is where you'll find the Patreon and the PayPal links. And thank you to everyone who continues to crowdfund The Mark Thompson Show and keep it rolling. Albert, thank you so much for all the help today. You're awesome.
You're welcome, and we'll do it again tomorrow. It's going to be David Katz tomorrow.
Yeah, David Katz is coming tomorrow. It's going to be a good show. You sound really excited about it.
It's always a good listen. Like David Katz, David K. Johnson, those are my favorites. So.
Awesome. Bye-bye. See you tomorrow, everybody. And the after party live happens right now.